Are the Knicks and Cavs in a tier of their own in the Eastern Conference? We chat with Danny Cunningham of Locked On Cavs to find out.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Gavin Schall. I am a native New Yorker. I'm a credentialed media member that's been covering the New York Knicks for nearly a decade, and I'm also the Saturday co-host of the Locked On NBA podcast, so be sure to check me out there every single week. You are, of course, listening to Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks, giving the most detailed insight on your favorite team 5 whole days a week, 11 months out of the year in August, 3 days a week for the most part. So be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans in subscribing on both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team every single day. On today's show, I'm lucky enough to be joined by one of my good friends in the Locked On Podcast Network, Danny Cunningham, the solo host of the Locked On Cavs podcast, to discuss if the Knicks and Cavs are truly in a tier of their own in the Eastern Conference. And Danny also asked me a lot of stuff about the Knicks, like if they made the right decision to fire Tom Thibodeau, how I would grade their offseason, how real last season's playoff run, and what does the worst case scenario look like for the New York Knicks this year? We get into all that in just a sec right here on Locked On Knicks. But before we get into things with Danny, I wanted to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right, without further ado, let's get into it with Danny Cunningham.
Well, the top two teams in the Eastern Conference this year, I think it's safe to say everybody believes in some way, shape, or form going to be the Cleveland Cavaliers and the New York Knicks. The Knicks, of course, coming off of their first conference finals appearance in a very long time, and the Cavs coming off of a very disappointing postseason. So bringing in Gavin Schall to talk about everything that has changed or hasn't changed with the New York Knicks since the last time we spoke. Gavin, obviously, the Knicks went on a very lengthy postseason run that I think it's fair to say very many people did not expect getting to the conference finals. Just about everybody, including myself and maybe even you, had picked the Boston Celtics to beat them in the conference semifinals. That did not happen, and the Knicks got as close as 2 games away from going to the NBA Finals. But what's the summer been like in New York?
I think it's been a successful one. Biggest thing for me was that they moved on from Tom Thibodeau. I was going to talk about this later, but I was going through my Knicks Cavs notes from last season in anticipation of this matchup, and I wrote at some point during Game 2 in just in a haze because it was that kind of game where Cleveland won 142-105. Quote: "The Knicks don't have a substantial talent deficit in this matchup. They do have a substantial coaching deficit." I don't know if that's a bar or not, but I think it held true. And I think despite the fact that the Knicks made the conference finals, it was warranted to move on from Tom Thibodeau. He was consistently over-reliant on to the point that it was far and away the most played lineup in the NBA, a lineup that was not really good in 2025 in their starting five. Just failed to make adjustments throughout, was not particularly creative offensively, though again, the biggest thing in that was player deployment and just the combinations he chose, something I think Kenny Atkinson is very good at, and the Knicks could learn from the Cavs a little bit on. But that was the single biggest thing. Guerschon, Yabusele, and Jordan Clarkson, getting them for a combined $7 million, I think is just a major win for the New York Knicks. I think those guys are substantial upgrades over what the Knicks had in their 7th and 8th spots a year ago. Both excellent shooters. Clarkson, a really underrated shot creator. I think they're going to make the Knicks a lot better. And then everyone else is back. Obviously, in a perfect world, maybe they swing a grade for Giannis, or not a trade for Giannis, but that was never really realistic. I think they had a really successful offseason.
When they fired Tibbs, which I think a lot of people expected to happen if they were not getting by Boston. But obviously they go on this run in the postseason and they have these magnificent comebacks against the Boston Celtics, where I think they were down by 20 in at least 2 of the wins they had against the Celtics.
Games of the series.
Yeah, they were both 2 games in Boston, down by 20, come back, have these incredible wins, and they find a way to win the series. And yes, I know everyone's going to bring up Jason Tatum's Achilles injury, but they were winning. They were about to go up 3-1 when that injury happened. Like, I think that with or without that injury, the Knicks were probably going to win that series. With that happening, how surprised were you that after getting over that hump, after beating Boston, after getting to the conference finals, that the Knicks still decided it was time to move on from Tibbs?
I was I was maybe a tiny bit surprised. It certainly wasn't a shock. I trust Leon Rose. I trust this front office. They were pretty close to firing Tom Thibodeau during a bad stretch. I think at the start of the 2022-23 season, like they've gotten up to that brink before. Tibbs, to his credit, pushed past it. And I've tried to emphasize this to people as much as I think on our podcast and the Locked On Knicks side of this listening knows. Alex and I have probably been deemed anti-Tibbs. Like there's a world where this doesn't work out for the New York Knicks, right? Because he certainly brought like a level of competency. I think this was one of the best player development staffs in the NBA. We saw just an immeasurable number of guys get significantly better, have career seasons under Tom Thibodeau. And he was just by like a stratospheric margin their most successful coach in the last 25 years. So in that sense, it was a surprise. And yet I'm very much a process over results kind of guy. And I think there was a recognition perhaps from the players, certainly from Leon Rose in this front office, that the process probably superseded the results. And there was a world where they lost the Detroit Pistons in round one. And this wasn't really much of a decision to be made. Like a bunch of those games were decided by 5 points or less. I think it's a credit to Jalen Brunson and really just this whole roster, the mettle they showed getting out of that series, battling the Boston Celtics, to your point, and the ability to come back late in those games. Probably the best third quarter in Knicks history in game 4 of that series, fighting their way back against the Indiana Pacers in a series where it would have been incredibly easy for them to lay down. And they were again down by 20 points with the chance to go down 3-0 in game 3. And some of that is a credit to Tibbs. I think it is a recognition from the front office about what's real about that run, which this team is talented enough to make the NBA Finals. They might be talented enough to win the NBA Finals. And with more optimal coaching, there's a world where there's an even better result than an Eastern Conference Finals.
So do you view Mike Brown as more optimal coaching? Like, do you think that was the correct and a hire that's going to make a big enough difference when next postseason arrives? Because this is not a move, let's be honest. It's not about the regular season in the same way that the Cavaliers, when they fired JB Bickerstaff after the previous season, that move was not about the regular season. It was about the postseason. I think that this Knicks move, firing Tibbs and hiring Mike Brown, very similar. I'm just curious how you view Brown as a postseason coach.
Yeah, I think he certainly wasn't the most exciting option on the table. The Knicks very famously canvassed essentially the entire NBA. I don't know, okay, maybe a sign of respect. I don't know if Kenny Atkinson was one of the coaches they at least publicly reached out to, got shut down a whole lot. It seemed pretty well telegraphed that Jason Kidd was their number one option. He seemingly wanted to go to New York, could not get out of his contract in Dallas, so that didn't happen. I am happy with Mike Brown. Like I give it a solid B for now, and I'm kind of waiting on what it actually looks like. But from everything I've gathered, he is a little bit more willing to be versatile in his approach. Tom Thibodeau was very much the mindset of like, I know how to play winning basketball. I've had a lot of success. I am going to, if it's a square player in a round hole, God damn it, we're squeezing it in there. We're going to make it work. And I think Mike Brown is a little bit more willing to be adaptable, particularly on the defensive end of the floor. Obviously, just a couple seasons removed from coaching the Kings to the playoffs for the first time in 16 years. That season, they had the best offense in NBA history. My biggest question about him is going to be his willingness to make adjustments from a lineup perspective. That is something I mentioned earlier, but it was a theme all season long for the New York Knicks, an unwillingness in particular to play 5 out and lean into Karl Anthony Towns' greatest strength. Deuce McBride was the one player on the New York Knicks roster that was in all 5 of their best lineups, and yet Tom Thibodeau consistently reluctant to rely on him at the end of games, even though it allowed teams to put a wing on Karl Anthony Towns, and neutered what at the beginning of the season was right up there with the Cavs as one of the better offenses in NBA history. So I'm fascinated to see how Mike Brown approaches the starting lineup. Does he stick with what Tom Thibodeau did and thinks difference in tactics could actually make that lineup really effective, even though it wasn't? Does he go double big like Tibbs was forced to do late in the playoffs? Or does he lean into shooting and actually go 5 out? We're going to see. He did bury Keon Ellis in Sacramento, which is a little bit scary because I think that's kind of a facsimile for what happened with Deuce McBride. But overall, I'm pretty confident in him tactically. I think just like Tom Thibodeau, he'll be able to handle the much feared, maligned New York media market. So we'll see. But I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about Mike Brown.
So one of the things that I've been asking in these conversations that I've been having with other people that cover Eastern Conference teams is what is the ceiling of the team that you cover? But I think that the ceiling of the Knicks is winning the title, and they were in the conference finals last year. And I would imagine that you would agree with that. So instead, I'm going to ask you, what's the floor for the Knicks next year?
That's a great dark question, Danny.
Yeah, we're getting real
I,
dark here in August, man.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to continue this conversation with Danny in just a sec, getting into what the floor looks like for the New York Knicks this upcoming season. But first, I want to tell you about our good friends over at Game Time. We've all been there logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've just been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. What I love about Game Time is, I mean, like they essentially just take all the uncertainty out of buying tickets. How do they do that? I'll tell you a couple different ways. If you ever wonder what your seat will look like before you buy, the app shows you a panoramic seat view, so there are absolutely no surprises. Also with Game Time, the price you see is the price you pay. There's no hidden fees. If you're a little worried about what happens if your plans ultimately change, the Game Time guarantee has your back with cancellation protection and so much more. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and redeem code and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You can create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute ticket, lowest price guaranteed. They could lose in the first round of the playoffs, right? We saw it. Wow. We saw it last year, right? Against the Detroit Pistons, right? If the Knicks here's I think the underrated part of last season for Knicks fans who were saying see, Tibbs worked his magic. They won 50 games. They got to the conference finals. The Knicks were shockingly healthy in some ways. Like OG Anunoby had far and away the healthiest season of his career. I believe I'll double check. I think since his rookie year. Karl Anthony Towns had, I think, his healthiest season in the last 5 years for the New York Knicks. Jalen Brunson missed 15 games late in the season, but was, for the most part, even though it felt like he turned his ankle every 10 minutes, for the most part was healthy come playoff time. Like these guys, Mikal Bridges continues to never miss a game. Like that is not a guarantee year after year. We saw it in Cleveland last year, right? Where they were pretty healthy all year. They did everything right in terms of managing minutes, and yet they still dealt with just a myriad of injuries throughout the postseason that ultimately contributed to their downfall. So if the Knicks are a little bit less healthy, if Mike Brown is a little bit closer to Tom Thibodeau in terms of his tactical creativity and lineup usage than I want to admit, the Knicks could, I don't know, who's going to be the 7th seed? Like this, if the Philadelphia 76ers are injured all year and they're the 7th seed and the Knicks are the 2 seed and they're magically healthy, they absolutely have the talent to beat the Knicks in a 7-game series if someone gets hurt for the Knicks, or the Knicks just have a suboptimal shooting series. I really think I would put Cleveland, Oklahoma City, and maybe Denver, who are the teams, if their star, as long as their best player doesn't get hurt, they probably just have enough depth to beat almost any 7 or 8 seed. But I think it would be hubris to some extent to suggest that the Knicks, it's impossible that they could lose in the first round of the playoffs, or it's impossible they could get upset by the Orlando Magic or the Detroit Pistons in the second round of the playoffs, right? They're an extremely talented team, but I don't think there is such a margin for error like there is in Oklahoma City, like there was in the past with Golden State, that they're just a lock to make the conference finals.
I do think that's a fair thing. And I think that, to your point, and maybe this isn't something that we want to say out loud, but I think the Knicks last year in the postseason were actually closer to losing to the Pistons in the first round than they were to losing to Boston in the second round. And I understand that they won both of those series in 6 games. And I understand that there were some injuries in Boston that maybe complicated things a little bit aside from just Jason Tatum. Mm-hmm. But I looked at that and said, there's a world in which the ball bounces a different way 1 or 2 times and the Detroit Pistons win that series against the New York Knicks. Mm-hmm. I think more things would have had to go wrong for the Knicks against the Celtics than would have had to go wrong against the Pistons. I just think that margin was maybe a little bit thinner than we want to admit. Now, ultimately they won both those series, so who cares? That doesn't actually matter. But if you do want to get dark and go to that place, I think that's kind of the recipe for why. And then as we look at the offseason, and we talked a bunch about the coaching change that was made, we haven't talked a lot about the personnel changes. And this is a Knicks team that's going to look pretty similar to what the Knicks were last year, but they did add Jordan Clarkson. They did add Guerschon Yabusele, as you mentioned. Is there something that the Knicks maybe didn't do this summer that you thought that they should have, or maybe might have?
No, I don't think so. I was again like open to the idea that they're going to make one more big move, but it was why the Mikal Bridges trade was so maligned in retrospect. Like they kind of spent those cards, right? They traded 5 first-round picks. The one thing they didn't do was really trade any significant player equity in that trade. So there was still a world where they said, hey, like we want to go out and try to get Devin Booker. We want to go throw all of our chips in for Giannis. It was just like they were never like even in a world where those guys were available, they were never going to have the top offer for those guys, and just like the cap implications would make your brain bleed a little bit. Like it was just not really realistic. The best thing they could have possibly done was find a new coach, a better coach, which I think they did, and supplement on the margins, which I absolutely think they did. Like the single biggest thing the Knicks missed last year, given the style that Tom Thibodeau wanted to play, was a secondary shot creator after Jalen Brunson, because that is just not really Karl Anthony Towns' game. Julius Randle, for like all the criticism he took in New York, incredibly good at just putting his head down, drawing a crowd in the lane, and generating corner threes. Like you saw Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby fall from like two of the leaders in corner 3-point volume in the NBA just down a bit. Deuce McBride's 3-point volume from the corners was down. And I think someone like Jordan Clarkson, even in limited minutes, can help boost that a little bit. Having another guy in Guerschon Yabusele who can shoot above the break threes and is comfortable attacking a closeout, like that'll help a little bit. They drafted 4 rookies the year before. Like I don't think any of those guys can contribute day one, but that is a little bit of extra depth, and all guys who look good in summer league for the New York Knicks. Presumably you get a little bit more of Mitchell Robinson this year, who only came back for the final 20 games or so and wasn't really at full strength until the playoffs. Like I do think this is a deeper team, and if those injuries do come up, they're a little bit more well insulated to deal with them than they were last year.
Well, and I do think that the depth could be something for the Knicks this year that maybe matters a little bit more with Mike Brown. Not to get back to rehash this, but like the reputation Tibbs has is that he's going to play 6 and trust 5, or play 5 and trust 4 at times. And I'm maybe exaggerating just a little bit there, but I do think that Mike Brown, despite the fact that he buried Keon Ellis on the bench in Sacramento, I do think that you will see an extended rotation in December and January and February in New York in a way that you didn't previously under Tibbs. So I do think that added depth with a different coach actually matters more than that added depth would have meant had they not made the change going from Tibbs to Mike Brown.
Yep, completely agree with you. And I think the single biggest thing is like even more so than the raw minutes is just employing a lot of different lineups. Like this stood out to me when I was looking at the Cavs lineup numbers, which we'll touch on next segment. But again, the Knicks' most used lineup was over 1,800 possessions last year. The Cavs' most used lineup, I think, was 523. I really hope the Knicks are closer to that. And like, it almost doesn't matter who you start. It's just how many different lineup combinations can you get on the floor? And do you have like substantial data by the time you get to April? All right, here are our 5 best lineups. And we actually know what to rely on, instead of like experimenting halfway through the series in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Indiana Pacers and being like, you know what? Landry Shaman's pretty good. I actually am going to play him 15 minutes a game. Precious Achiuwa, that was weird that I played him so much. He's actually not that useful in the Eastern Conference Finals, and just using the regular season as a time for experimentation, because frankly, like obviously it'd be nice to be the 1 seed. It matters so much more that the Knicks know their strengths than they're the 1 seed versus the 4 seed. And I think that's something Cleveland embraced, and we're still really successful while embracing it last year.
So I have one Eastern Conference question that I want to get to, and then we'll flip to talking more Cavs stuff here. But so much of the conversation, and I think that this is fitting because I am at least of the opinion that the Cavs and the Knicks, some combination. I think the Cavs are probably still going to win a few more regular season games than the Knicks, and I think that FanDuel certainly has it that way. The postseason, a different story, but I think that the Cavs and the Knicks are going to be the top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference. And there is this notion that the East is wide open and that there are a lot of different teams that can do all these things. And I'm curious how you see that, because I sit here and I think, yeah, the Cavs need to prove that they can go out and win multiple playoff rounds, and they need to prove that they can get to the finals, and the Knicks to some extent need to prove that they can get over that hump too. But then I look at it and I think there's a pretty significant drop off. Like maybe if you want to say Orlando can do it, we've not seen that group win a single playoff series. Atlanta went to the conference finals 4 years ago on one of the flukiest runs ever. Like I don't see the East as wide open. I think there are 2 teams at the top better than everybody else that need to prove they can do it in the playoffs, but I don't think that translates to being wide open. And I'm just curious where you think where you stand on all of that.
All right. I'm in total agreement with you. I think there is a pretty significant meridian after that clear tier
word.
one of Cleveland and New York. Orlando is the most interesting team to me. I'm fascinated. I know he's looked good for Team Germany this summer. Like if Franz Wagner can fix his jumper, I think the touch is there for him. I know just like listening to Magic fans, their biggest concern at times is him shooting open jumpers versus like off the dribble where he's in more of a rhythm. Like if he jumps from, I mean, in the playoffs, I think he was 17% from three. If he's more like a 36% 3-point shooter on volume, I think that is pretty revelatory for them. I think Desmond Bane alone is pretty revelatory for them. Obviously having a healthy Jalen Suggs, a healthy Mo Wagner. Like I know some people question the price for Bane. I really like that move. And I liked how bold they were about going for it because the East is only open in the sense that there is not a Boston Celtics-esque power coming into the season. And yes, like and maybe we'll get into this. I'm curious your perspective on it. There's a world where you could make the argument that Cleveland is that. They certainly had a regular season befitting of that. But given what Boston had done to the in the playoffs in 23-24, coming into last season, I just thought that 5-man lineup, both offensively and defensively, there was not an obvious weakness there outside of Kristaps Porzingis' health, which obviously did end up being an issue. I don't think there is a single team like that in the East that is just a beyond reproach. So in that sense, I think there is an opening, and I appreciate that Orlando went for it. And I think from a talent perspective, there isn't really a huge gap between them and Cleveland and New York. I still tend to think that teams need to take their lumps unless they're just so overwhelmingly talented that those lumps kind of go out the window. Or you're like Oklahoma City, you could have games and you could have moments where you look a little bit young, but your defense is so good and you've such a margin for error that it ultimately doesn't matter. And clearly no one thinks Orlando is that this year. So given that argument, I do think it's Cleveland. I do think it's New York. And I think the Cavs are in some ways almost like the lesser known entity, just because we haven't really seen like a large sample size of the team they became last season in the playoffs. Like if they are who they were in the regular season, they should maybe be in a tier separate from the New York Knicks. But I don't, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, I don't think you can justify doing that just because, I mean, similar to Orlando, we've seen Cleveland win a round twice now. We haven't seen them put it all together yet. So that question still lingers. But from a talent, cohesiveness, coaching perspective, they are more of a sure thing right now than the Knicks are. And the Knicks are more of a sure thing by, I think, a significant margin than anyone else in the East after that.
Yeah, and I look at what Orlando did, and like I have them third in the East right now, but I just don't know that they have the backcourt creation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not. I think that how you feel about this is pretty much how you feel about Jalen Suggs. And I am not somebody that's super high on Jalen Suggs as an offensive player. I think he's a terrific defender. But if you feel really good about Jalen Suggs, you probably feel differently about this. I just don't know that they have enough. I don't know. They've got some really talented offensive players. I don't know that they have the straw that stirs the drink. And I think it's really hard to advance deep in the postseason and be a team that can go on a really deep run without having that straw. I still think that their offense is going to leave something to be desired. They'll be better, like I would predict, going to be real bold here, and they'll be a top 20 offense for the first time in forever because the Orlando Magic have not done that in about a decade.
Yeah,
but I do think that it's insane.
It was 2012 or 2011. Zach Lowe brings it up like once a week, but it's
insane. I think that they will finally break that, but I don't know that they're going to be a top 15 offense. Mm-hmm. And I think that you need to be that to move forward pretty deep in the playoffs. All right, we've talked a lot about the Knicks, a little bit about the rest of the East, basically the Orlando Magic. We're going to get into the Cavs next right here on this Locked On Cavs Knicks crossover show.
All right, guys, that is going to be it for part one of this podcast. We're going to come back tomorrow. We are going to talk through the New York Knicks schedule. And then we're going to get some of Danny's thoughts on the Knicks. And if he thinks that they're on the same level as the Cleveland Cavaliers, because I know going into last year's playoffs, he certainly thought Cleveland was a substantially better team. I might have agreed with him to some extent. So we're going to see if our thoughts have changed on that and so much more tomorrow on Locked On Knicks. Until then, be good. We'll talk to you soon right here on Locked On Knicks.